The Synoptic Gospels by Sarah Chantry. What is a gospel? The word gospel is derived from the Old English word Godspell, God meaning good, and spell meaning news or story. The original word used to describe the gospel in the New Testament is the Greek term euangelion and is rooted in the Old Testament Hebrew word basar, which is a verb that meant announcing good news and bringing news of victory. With knowing what the word gospel means, we need to know what is the purpose of the gospel. The purpose of all the gospel accounts written is to relate the good news about the story of Jesus and who he was, and to make a public proclamation in order to invite all people to be part of it and begin a relationship with him for eternity. The New Testament contains 4 gospel accounts, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These 4 gospels are referred to as canonical gospels because the church has identified these 4 as being divinely inspired. There were actually many other gospel accounts written, but they are not included in the Bible and were not accepted as part of the genuine apostolic tradition. These other gospel accounts are known as the apocryphal gospels. All 4 of the canonical gospels were written in the 1st century. There is no mention of the destruction of the Jewish temple at Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Romans in any of the 4 gospels, and because of this, it is likely that they were written before this time. While it's possible that Matthew was written first in Aramaic or Hebrew, the first known writing was in Greek and was dated possibly after the writings of Mark. There is strong evidence pointing to Mark being the first gospel recorded. Mark was a disciple of Peter and was not an eyewitness to the accounts of the life of Jesus. He wrote his gospel account specifically for the Romans and with the rulers of the world with great homage for the law in mind. Mark was written in approximately 55 AD. Matthew was one of Jesus' 12 disciples and was a tax collector. He wrote his account of the gospel specifically for the Jews in approximately 58 AD. Luke was possibly the most learned out of the 4 authors and was a physician. He was not an eyewitness to Jesus' life, but wrote his account specifically for the Greeks in approximately 59 AD. John was also an apostle of Jesus and recorded his account of the gospel from first-hand eyewitness accounts. He wrote his gospel for all mankind and focused on the greatness and glory of Christ's divine nature. Although John's gospel also does not mention the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, there are speculations that John was written much later than the other 3 gospels, around approximately 80 to 90 AD. 3 out of 4 gospel accounts are referred to as the Synoptic Gospels. These 3 gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The word synoptic means seen together or with the same eye. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are considered synoptic because they all present the basic story of Jesus in similar ways. They all have a similar order of events mentioned, multiple stories, sayings, and use very similar and sometimes identical wording throughout all 3 gospels. There are many different theories on how the synoptics were written and where their inspiration came from. Oral tradition assumed that each of the authors wrote independently of each other and simply recorded their gospels from the stories and parables retold through oral repetition. The mutual use hypothesis theorizes that 2 of the writers used the first gospel written to base theirs off of. An interesting theory is the use of sources hypothesis. There is speculation that not only was there mutual use, but also a theoretical document referred to as Quelle, or Q, that possibly was comprised of sayings and narratives. There may also be other sources, as both Matthew and Luke contain material that is not found anywhere else. With these things said, the true purpose of the Gospel is so simply and eloquently stated by John in chapter 20:31, when he says, "So that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." These Gospels are so important because without these accounts of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, we would not have Christianity, and the prophecy of Isaiah in the Old Testament about a Savior coming would not have been fulfilled.